We recording. Cool. Cool. Um, yeah, man, what you been up to? Any particular ideas or anything on your mind recently?
Not done recently. I'm just noticing some more on my particular echo chamber of
Hmm.
the Twitter. I'm seeing
Yes.
some more Wokistani wins, I would say, from a psychological perspective.
Wokistani, I like that. That's funny. What would you how would you define that? Is that just like the wokeism in particular, or is there actually some kind of
Well,
like Islamic tie-in?
I mean, everyone Wokistani ultimately would just be the postmodernism deconstructionism,
Right.
which is the it's rooted in nihilism, and
Right.
I mean I've talked about this quite often online. Um, and as far as I can tell, it's a death cult. It's just people who are born and they're not right in the head. They're not.
Yes.
I mean, half the time when you talk with them, they're like, "I didn't ask to be born," like that kind of mentality, you know.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just they're born into a world of decadence, excess, and there's no stability. Half of them come from broken homes, and they're just wired to be parasites and destroy everything they touch. And
Right.
they have a lot of power right now in America because America is the most decayed and the most corrupt, and so we have the most of them out of all the other countries. And that's why they vote people into power that cause things, like the whole. And I look at like California, they
Yeah.
vote people in power, they remove their ability to defend themselves by any metric unless you're in a press class, and then you go and you remove their any security, and so you just have a state where you're a deer waiting to be shot and ate by a wolf, and they
Right.
like that. They want that. That's what they
Right.
want, and they also want to be eaten by the wolves because they don't want to be live. It's a death cult.
Right. They just wanted
So
to take
anytime
everybody
I
else with them. Yeah.
yeah, no, it absolutely is death cult, and I will always. So I call them. They're called. Eric Weinstein uses the word Wokistani. I like it.
Okay.
And then on the right is Magistani, which is whatever the populist is at the time. And
Right.
so right now it's Trump. Magastanis are a lot smaller. They've gotten smaller every single year as they've learned that Trump is just a human. He's just a populist, just another one. And so
So
as he's becoming more human and more fallible, they're losing interest in him. So Magostani is definitely losing a lot of steam, but we're gonna see another resurgence of something else. Anyway, along with the Islam, which of course Israel is dragging us into.
right.
I'm seeing a lot of the Wokistanis are happy because, well, like I said, they're a death cult. They like to see death, and they want to see the destruction of the human race internally.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing that there's a lot more wins. And then just before I got on, I saw that they were taking down the. They showed a video of a smelting of um, what was it, Robert Lee, the Confederate guy,
Robert E. Lee. Yeah.
and
The
they
general.
were
Yeah.
melting down his statue, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is like a psychological win for them, I guess. But it doesn't matter in like the real world terms. But from a psychological perspective, when I watch and I see like trends when I'm looking at aggregates of humans. That
Right.
for me, I look for like points in time where something happens. And so removing statues is nothing new, but filming yourself melting down a statue of the old world, that reminds me a lot of like, ancient Rome where they're tearing down those statues
Hmm.
and then, smelting the golds to pay the fee to the band of raiders that took over their country and everything. I thought that was kind of like what I
Yeah.
that's like
It's
that's kind of like what I
symbolic.
was watching.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely cyclical and symbolic. I wrote down a few things, but one of the things I wanted to come back to is an interesting interaction that I had recently. A guy who I knew years ago before I was even really politically inclined, and neither was he at the time. We were both just kind of like seeking spiritual, just kind of getting started, and we both went like I went far right, farther right. He went farther left, and it got to the point not long ago where we were, I guess, independently of one another, we had both pretty much unfollowed the other just because we were just like too far gone. Well, because of this Israel conflict is really topsy turvy, and it's really a horseshoe theory, or a horseshoe effect, where the sides are like swapped, and people are kind of just like the Ukraine thing. You had liberals fighting for not like supporting Nazis. Um, so it was like that, and he was kind of like, I think we're like on we have, he's like, I looked at your profile because I wanted to hear your take on this, and I feel like we're on the same side, but for different reasons. And this reminds me of something that may have been from one of our conversations or one of the conversations I had recently, which was saying that this conflict, because of the horseshoe nature of it, may be an opportunity to reconnect with the left in a way that we had like back in the Occupy days, where we're actually unified against the same problem. And a lot of that's probably just because it's natural for them to identify with the most, like the weakest and the most oppressed and the poorest and the most brown. So they're naturally defined. They're siding with Hamas, which means they're against Israel, and so that's like, okay, well, maybe we can work together. So it's really interesting.
We have not redefined what we would call the cultural political spectrum. And it's not just cultural, it's not just political. Culture is downstream, politics is downstream of culture.
I
But when you
agree.
combine them together, we have not had an update since the 1950s.
Yeah.
So what you're witnessing today, when you see, these images of like you have like the three lines and it's like left, right, and then you see the left getting further and further left, and they're saying, why did you kick me down here, like
Right.
in the middle? You know what I'm talking about? You ever seen those images?
Yeah, like an
It's
Overton sort
not
of.
it,
Yeah.
yeah what's it, I mean, not exactly an Overton window, but what's occurring is we're reestablishing the cultural political spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
because the old one doesn't work. We can't just say communism versus capitalism, black versus white. Those are really blunt force, and they don't work anymore because
Right.
culture has become so complicated, just
Right.
like what happens with religion, right? In religions, as society becomes more complicated, the religion doesn't answer any more questions. There's a reason that there's no one like polytheism's dead because science killed it, but before that killed it, Christianity killed it
Mm-hmm.
because it didn't answer a damn question that it was important to answer during the crises that they were encountering,
Mm-hmm.
especially with technology, because technology breaks the way we perceive reality. And so we're seeing this with the political cultural spectrum as well. And I think a lot of people are having to understand that rather than a line, it's actually forming into like a horseshoe shape,
Right.
where the majority of the extremes are going to be dissonant, and they always are dissonant.
Mm-hmm.
But the bulk of us are going to be down here in the bottom. And,
Yeah.
we are going to have small disagreements, but we can actually get along. The only people we can't get along with are the dissidents, which is the death cultists. So the gay community I can get along with, probably. The trans community I cannot, because their entire idea is nature was not built correctly by my standard, and so I have to destroy everything, including myself, and build it back the way my broken brain perceives it to be.
Right.
And then they end up killing themselves and dragging themselves down. And then you also have on that same end, like the black Marxists are also like that, where they're narcissistic, envious, extremely violent, psychologically speaking, and extremely feminine in their tactics for power. And they just want to watch the world burn. And they can't say that, but they have the clever ways of saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the flip side on the right, and the other side of the horseshoe is prevalent as well. My big online community is what they call like the goon community, which is like civilians who are kind of like into military-esque kind of things, prepared as civilians. Like I was in auxiliary for a couple of years, so I have some military experience, but I don't have like the grunt experience like a lot of guys do. And they tend to be more in the middle, even though you would think they'd be more on the right or the left,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that most people are in the middle.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the horseshoe, because like we're saying, it's kind of hard to, it may be hard to define the political cultural spectrum on a linear, on a linear spectrum in general. There may be some other shapes it may take, and like there are some depending on how you're measuring it, it may start to look like a horseshoe because at the spectrums, like the things start to coalesce again, and you see the same problems. Um, and yeah, you made a good point about like really a lot of people are in the middle, and that's really always been the place I think that I want to be. And it's not to be it's not to be that you want to be a centrist, that like you're literally just saying no matter what the two ends of the spectrum are, I want to be between them. Like that's the big criticism that a lot of centrists get.
It's the biggest part of the U for a reason.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the most rational.
Yeah, and like you could take you could take a bell curve too. It's like that's almost like kind of the same thing, just in terms of different ways to plot it. But like I think it's good to find a balance, and depending on what your spectrum is, like especially like for example the masculine feminine spectrum. Like a lot of times the left right political cultural spectrum has been reduced to like a male female kind of like an interaction of male female energies,
Well,
and
it's worse than that. It's the 1950s nostalgia crowds,
right.
which is like 90% of the right, and they reduce masculine feminine based on that archetypes from that time, and they're not even valid anymore.
Yeah, yeah, it's really tough the male female thing. Um, one thing I wanted to go back to, you said that like the speaking of 1950 nostalgic culture, you said that the MAGA crowd you think is kind of dying, and where do you think those people are going to land? Are they just going to be? Are they going to not support politics anymore? Are they going to jump onto some other bandwagon or what?
Yeah, so the majority of the disenfranchised are going to be between 20 and 40, and they're going to be male if they're right. And
Right.
that exact same demographic, female for left.
Mm-hmm.
That's a minority, but they're overrepresented online. I'm willing to bet you over the next 10 years, as we see more and more viral videos,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see people being like, oh, the whole world's crazy. But then if
Right.
I take an algorithm and I line up every single one of those videos, the overlap of those individuals is going to incrementally get larger and larger because
Mm-hmm.
there's not that many crazy people in retrospect to the aggregate of population, but
Right.
they're overrepresented online. And so we
Online.
want to make
Yeah.
sure that we understand that because we outnumber them. We just don't realize we outnumber them because online they're all you see because they're the most hyperbolous.
Right. Yeah, that's a really
So
good
I want
point
to
about
establish
the
that.
about the general biases that we run into with the online culture and how just another reminder of how important it is to have a balance and to make sure you're engaging with like locals and different kind of people and stuff like that just to so you're not losing touch with reality.
But to answer your question, where do I think they're going to land? Some of them are going to end up in the hyperbolous, ends of probably on the right. The problem is if you're rational, at some point you come to the conclusion that the things that they say are going to happen are not happening.
Mm-hmm.
We went through this during the Bilderbergs back in the 70s and the 80s. Alex Jones got super radicalized watching those videos on late night television.
Right.
And over time, a lot of people realized nothing happened.
Yeah.
Like they did everything they said was going to happen. It just silently went away. This is happening again with the Electric Universe, which is very it's kind of like a pseudoscience cult that I paid a lot of attention to in like 2018, 2019, 2020 because I
Yeah.
was fascinated by it. And then seeing how people articulated like using falsified science to predict the doomsday scenario,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would that's where I came up with the concept of, and this is not a new concept, it's just I independently came to this conclusion along with others narrative assimilation, which is taking multiple sources from various aspects of academia, books, whatever, and assimilating them very similar to how the Bible was constructed
Right.
and making a straw man, if you will. It's not exactly a straw man, but it's definitely not a steel man. Kind of like a narrative where every time I tell you something, you have a combination of words to use to deflect back.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to establish that some of these MAGAs are going to go towards that route. The rest of them are going to go towards whichever populist, because most of them are working class.
Yeah.
And if they're not working class, they're business owners, which is the same thing. They just make more money. Um, they're going to go probably towards whichever spectrum protects them, number one, because Trump is letting people get arrested, which concerned the fuck out of them. And then two, can promise to raise living standards or at least attack zeitgeists. Because their IQs lower, the zeitgeist is going to rotate depending on what they perceive. Twitter and Facebook are going to be the major points of view, which I understand the government's logic on suppressing that. But the problem is they're going to find it anyway with VPNs, which are free, and they're just going to go on 4chan and see even crazier crap. So
Right.
maybe it might be just best to leave shit alone so you don't get mega shit somewhere else. So,
Yeah.
um, I'm thinking that they're probably going to lean towards Kennedy if they're more neutral, or they're going to lean more towards, I would assume, Ramaswamy or DeSantis if they're more right.
Right.
Um, I'm not super sure because I don't have a good pulse on the MAGA crowd right now.
Yeah.
And the majority of them are extremely scared for the most part because they just watched the majority of their mythological heroes from 2021 get thrown in jail in a kangaroo court, which freaked them out to no ends. That
Yeah.
the justice system just threw out all rationality and
When
justice
Trump himself
in
is in
favor
court
of.
too.
Well, I mean, no, this happens. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that America is not in decline. And during societal declines, your rights go away, but you don't know it for about 100 years.
Right.
So we're moving into the area where we now know, hey, kangaroo courts are coming back. We saw these in the Soviet Union. We know what they look like. We know how to get around them. They're coming for, means of self-defense. So all gun owners have plan A through Z on how they're going to carefully be able to defend themselves and still get away with it when that becomes illegal.
Right.
Coming with communication tactics, things like that. And so we know how to move into this. The question is, will the aggregate, and by the way, most of this country is more on the left than the right. And it was like that during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Only 20% of the American population was in favor of the Revolutionary War, which is probably about the same across the spectrum because most people are weak and they're more docile and they don't want any conflict, and which
Right.
always is going to push more towards left.
It's always interesting to think about what those thresholds are. That you hear people say 3%, or like you just said 20%. Like what are these necessary thresholds to make things happen?
No, actually, it doesn't matter how many. It matters what does the leadership want. So
Right.
the Revolutionary War was the American elite getting pissed off at the British elite because they were equal, with the exception that the American elite didn't have the capacity to own things. They had to pay taxes, whereas the British elite did not. They were
Right.
getting pissed off, and rightfully so. And so they had the capability to mobilize because they owned they owned things, and they were able to combat the way they did. And so Trump is an example of that, but the problem is he's isolated. You would need to have like 50 Trumps come together and plot something for any, because the right cannot initiate without leadership. The left can. That's been a consistent. If you don't, I mean, even with the French Revolution, Napoleon was always going to come. It didn't really matter who he was. The French were already done. They were fighting, they were killing each other. With Robespierre, they were killing their own, and then after those people killed their own, they killed them. It was just a shit show. And so the left has always been able to just go out because they're disenfranchised and they're disconnected from reality. The
Right.
right is more grounded in conservatism, and so they're less disconnected. They are disconnected psychologically, but literally they fear for their life all the time, which is why they're so pro-gun. And so you're kind of hitting a dynamic where everyone's like, "Oh, civil war, civil war." No, it's not. There's not enough leadership on the right, and I don't think there can be for the right to be able to plan, with the exception of splinter groups.
Right.
Like me and five guys who know what we're doing, I probably can do a lot of fucking damage if I'm able to evade and keep my face off the cameras.
Right.
And I don't have to go anywhere near DC, right? But
Right.
the right is not going to do that because, especially if someone like me who's more higher IQ, I don't care. I have things that I actually are more. I'm more focusing my attention on
Right.
than that, and so it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is it's super funny to see on the different communication channels that always pops up as well when you're referring to like the mega crowds and such, and it just I never agree with it.
So, one thing I always like to bring it back to is looks like we can get carried away into all the different things happening on larger scales and making predictions about it and so forth. But I always do come back to this idea of how can we, because like we said earlier, like politics is downstream from culture. Like culture is a much more close and tangible thing, and like you just said too, like the more intelligent people know that they shouldn't put so much energy into things that we ultimately can't control that much. It's fun to think about and we can have some influence and it's good to be informed, but ultimately we've got to balance that with just our day-to-day lives and some of our more local concerns. And so that's one of the areas I always bring it back to whenever I'm like watching the news and I see it's like whatever Biden being retarded or whatever it is, I'm like, okay, back to my project or back to the project, which is like community building, which is like cultural operations. Like how can we and like it's something you said earlier about that sounded to me like basically like people building frames. How can they build worldviews? Again, a lot of it mirrors what Christians are doing or what religions do. Is basically gives those lower IQ people a cohesive set of kind of like an operating system to kind of help them navigate, because the existing operating systems have a lot of problems. And we can complain about it all day, but it's like somebody's got to engineer something better. That's a big part of trying to transition away from what they have now, is to offer something better. And so these are some of the things that I come back to, and that's what we're very much engaged in, right? Is trying to create worldviews, create some heuristics that people can go by to help navigate all the chaos. You don't have to go out there and watch the news and perfectly understand everything that's happening, but you also shouldn't be burying your head in the sand and totally unaware. So how can we find balances? How can we affect positive change directly through people we know, through our networks and our communities? Yeah, those are some of the ways that I try to ground out of that chaos.
All right, it sounds like a good pivot point to review the talk about the document then, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
Good
sounds
good
good.
context as
Good
usual.
context as you.
Oh, and I'm echoing a little bit. There you go. All right, so let's see here. I guess I can. It depends on how deep we want to go into it. I guess I don't have to share it on the screen. I've got it on my screen right here, but we'll just run through it. So the way I summarize overall, well, we'll just go through it one by one. So the first one here, so first of all, I guess for anyone that may not have seen the previous video, do you want to give a little bit of refresher context of like kind of what led to this document, what were some of the ideas behind it, and so forth? Oh, you're muted, by the way. You maybe push to talk.
Just full context, I wrote this to be for myself in case I came across. And I wrote this when I was around 18. I saw what was occurring in the world, and this was actually like pre-COVID there, and I was like, there's no one checking the powers that be.
Right.
There's zero checks.
Yes.
Absolutely none.
Yeah.
And I got worried because I was like, I'm seeing all of this fantasy in video games, movies, TV.
Right.
That there's people always coming to the rescue, or these shadow organizations that come to save the day.
Right.
And in real life,
Right.
they're just not there. And I was like, I need to at least put something down on paper to
Yeah.
where I feel that I can manufacture something that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That I went back to the Nuremberg trials, and I was like, okay, if I'm being tried as a leader of an organization, what can I put into writing as a way to where whoever is trying me cross culturally can say, that is not bad. I understand why you did that. Right. And if this actually stemmed further from like my writings, because I was writing like a series of like fantasy novels, and I was writing one about an organization.
Hell yeah.
That did just that. And then I wrote this, and this I took in isolation, and I just refined it. It's obviously probably not perfect.
Yeah.
It's a little wordy.
Yeah.
But it was the best that I could do as like a 20-year-old.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think from there, as I watched the world develop more, and I'm like, okay, I don't know how the hell this would work, because I'm pretty much talking about, going to like essentially corporate offices and then having little meetups afterwards about how we're going to watch, corruption and then go after the people who are corrupt, right?
Right.
I mean, you're talking about kidnapping, possibly assassination, if the criteria is met, things like that. And I was like, I don't know if that's actually plausible, because most people could not pull that off. But I
Right.
thought it would be an interesting thought experiment to at least put it on paper to see if anyone could pull it off. It would probably be using that framework.
Right.
And then also I tried to hit on the 5 key points that I thought that as a Western individual was most important. And I thought that was probably the best way.
Hell yeah. Very good. Yeah, yeah. Kind of like we talked about before. Like, I mean, we all love that idea. Like, a lot of our inspiration for what we think could be a better world or could be the solution to our problem comes through fiction. And just that idea of like an organization of people who even if it's through underhanded means, like they try to make the world better, like the Templars, for example, or the assassins in like Assassin's Creed. I know you reference. And I like the idea a lot. I've probably taken some inspirations subconsciously from a lot of similar places, and I think that a lot of what I'm trying to do with the natural order is create something like that, and it doesn't have to be on a huge scale. It doesn't have to be like actual like physical operations like kidnapping and that kind of stuff. Like if anything, it's just like again, just look at how like look at what something like Christianity could be. This is something that exists in our communities. It gives people value. It gives people a way to help their community, connect with other people, carry out their values, and really,
Yeah,
Christianity.
it's just a way to conduct yourself that you
Yeah,
could share that way to conduct yourself, and then when enough people do it, life gets better.
yeah, it's like it starts as a way to conduct yourself, and then it's like how can you conduct your relationship and your friendships and your family and your relationships. And then it's like, okay, well, how can you conduct your community and your organizations? And then it's like, here's how you can conduct your country. I mean, like, what's his name? Like the new Speaker of the House is like a Christian, super Christian dude, and so obviously this affects our country heavily. And it's just like, but it's also the idea of okay, well, Christianity in particular has a lot of problems. So anyway, so that's a lot of my frame. It's very similar. So the document's named, how do you pronounce it? Sankofa Project? It sounds kind of Russian.
Yeah, it's actually a dingree.
Is this the African one?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Um, cool. So let's jump in. Um,
You
so
can share the screen. It might be a little bit better for the context.
yeah,
If
let's see.
anyone
Let's see here. I'll just probably we'll just cover up our video. There's no way to do both. That'll be fine. All right, here we go. This is going to be a window capture. Window capture. That looks good. And I can probably zoom in here. Alrighty, that should work. All right, cool. So yeah, we'll probably just let's go and read the header here. So I shall not carelessly denigrate or undermine religious and social institutions, nor any other institution of men. No subversion.
I took that from Jordan Peterson and then he made extrapolated on it.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I like that. One thing that stands out to me about this point in particular, because obviously the idea of like don't undermine, don't, and that's not necessarily even saying don't parasite. That's just like don't subvert, don't undermine. But one of the first thing that comes to mind with that one is that like a lot of times, like we just talked about, this idea of like some kind of shadow organization that sometimes brings justice by underhanded means. Like sometimes you do need to undermine institutions, especially if they are corrupt, right? So what do you think about
You
that?
can't get rid of parasites by moralizing them.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm just saying, like, in terms of like the human body, like if I have a parasite in my body and it's
Right.
killing me, being moral with that parasite does not solve any of my problems. You know? And so
Yeah.
from an institutional perspective, my logic was okay. Well, no, and this is what I highlighted. I have like several lines of due process
Yeah.
because you can't just, if you're going to go after a power system, you better be damn sure that there is absolutely no other way that you can act. Because taking a life should be, if we're going to be functional humans in a civilization, a heavy decision.
Right.
It shouldn't just be done willy nilly like that. And so I tried my best to, outline that as best that I knew how to do at the time.
Yeah. And I'll probably I've got it where you can see the whole thing on the screen right now. You can see like this whole section we're on. I'll probably paste.
I can't see it.
Wait. Is there a way I can share it? I think I can also share it.
If you're sharing it with the group, that's fine. I'm just letting you know. I can pull it up on mine, and it's not that hard.
Okay, I can also share it into Discord. I think you should see it, and it should be able to go into the thing at the same time now. And yeah, that should be fine. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll put it there, and I may paste it in there so people can read the details. I won't read through the whole thing right now. But yeah, that's a good point about it. About you can't moralize parasitism, and that you have to be able to make some of those hard decisions. But like, would you agree that like sometimes you it's key that you use the word carelessly. I guess that's the key word. You didn't say I shall not denigrate or undermine. It says I should not carelessly do it. Like if I'm going to undermine or subvert any institution or religion, like I need to, like be purposeful and knowledgeable and aware
Due
about
process, because those institutions were created for a reason, and they've lasted this long for a reason.
Yeah.
And even if they're no longer useful, you better be damn sure that there is nothing that institution protects or holds. The biggest issue with the left and also the right recently is like you get the fence analogy, whereas a person walks up in a field and they see a fence, they don't know what it's for.
Yeah.
Um, and then they remove the fence, and then all of a sudden monsters come and kill everyone in the city 5 miles away.
Yeah. And some of
It's
those
like the
things
fence was
can.
there. You have no idea why the fence is there, but you better be damn sure before you remove it that it's not holding anything out.
This reminds me like an analogy as like a software engineer. It's kind of like it's basically like don't remove a huge function or like a huge block of code, like because and that's what institutions are in our society. They're like huge as functions within our cultural operating system, and we cannot carelessly
Yep.
rip them out. You know, we got to be tactile. So I like that. That's very good. Alrighty, let's see here. So number two, um, I shall protect and defend for the sovereignty of individualism and freedom of choice. So to me, the big word here is like freedom or sovereignty, and that's obviously and that has to be
Because
protected and defended.
opposite of that, the opposite of that is authoritarian communalism,
Right.
and when you get to that, your society in general, number one, you lose trust,
Yeah.
and then number two, all progress that your country could possibly make stops at that date that you enact it.
Yeah.
If you can look at China, they're still in the 1950s. Russia is still in the 1950s, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
Societally, culturally, they look like third world countries, but they shouldn't because they don't have individualism or freedom of choice. They've stalled their economy. And so all the other ones are, continuing to move up. And then in addition to that, no one trusts anyone not to have kids anymore.
Yeah.
And so you're just slowly disintegrating. And the bigger it is, the longer it takes. The Soviet Union took 100 years to collapse, and that wasn't even that big.
Yeah.
It was a big country, but the country itself, from a societal perspective, wasn't that big. America will take probably longer than China does. China just has more people, but these take hundreds of years to actually implode because they're so big. Um, and so we won't know the actual consequences until maybe after we are dead. But there will be consequences, and they're not going to be enjoyable because unless we can protect sovereignty, individualism, and
Yeah.
freedom.
So here's what I want to bring up about this. Like obviously, like overly totalitarian authoritarianism is like statistically, historically, objectively bad. But I would say that on the other side of the spectrum, like total anarchy, like is also bad. Like total chaos, total anarchy.
You're going to be a communal individual.
Exactly. So it's kind of like a balance, right? It's somewhere in the middle. There are times where
Yeah,
you have
you are
to.
you are a part of a community, and nested within that community, you are an individual that contributes.
Right. But there's still some
So
rules that you
you
have to
do
abide by. There's still some
correct.
things that.
That's why it's not communalism nested in individualism. It's uh sorry, yeah, it's you are an individual and nested around you is the
Yeah.
community, and that you must abide by that community. And if you don't like that community, you should be able to go to another one,
See, I
which is
like
what the
that.
United States mostly works. The Wokastanis love New York City and they love San Francisco. I don't know why you enjoy getting stabbed to death and watching your daughter get raped, but if that's what you want, that's fine. You can move there and enjoy that. I mean, there's a community in this country for pretty much everyone,
Yeah.
and I don't think that I think that mostly works, with the exception of the overarching federal issues that we have right now.
Yeah, and that's like the key should be to try to decentralize as much as possible and give, you know, give kind of the option and the freedom for people to kind of pursue different things. That's definitely really key. Um, so yeah, I like that, and yeah, there's definitely a balance in there somewhere. Like obviously, like there's, it's like, oh, should I give freedom of choice? I guess you technically do have the freedom to murder somebody, but there are consequences for these kind of things, right? So it's kind of like, um,
Yeah. So free will is a responsibility that you
yes,
need to take it that you need to take. Um, if you cannot be responsible, then you really shouldn't be able to enact free will, which
yeah,
is largely what prisons were meant to solve for.
right,
Um, until we made them companies and then they stopped working. So for
yeah,
the most part, yeah, you as an individual, I am responsible for the well being of my society, even if they like right now where I'm at in my complex, we're mostly working class people. I'm
right,
not working class. I'm a little bit higher up, like middle ish. Everyone else is mostly working. So there's high community during emergencies, but for the most part, we ignore each other,
right.
and that's how most of the country will be. Yeah.
So you said something. You said something really key, and this is how I've come to understand like a lot of like Kurt and proprietarianism and how it differs from or how it evolved out of beyond libertarianism. Is the key word is that free will and freedom and liberty, it requires responsibility. You've got to like, and like you said here, protect and defend it. You're not just handed freedom. You're not just born with freedom. Like you have to actively be
The
responsible.
default is authoritarianism. There is not a single, I would say, mostly conscious, and the max here will probably be baboons, orangutans, or chimpanzees.
Right.
That is not a top-down, violent as all hell hierarchy,
Yep.
with the exception of bonobos, which are matriarchal, but they're an outlier because they have no natural predators, abundant food, and abundant water. And all mammals, when they have excess, become hypersexualized and female. So
Interesting.
that's not anyone's surprise.
And that's kind of what's happening
Yeah.
to our society.
Oh yeah, Jack Donovan wrote a very, very, very good article back in the '90s, I believe, about bonobos and chimpanzees, and he was explaining that we go back and forth in human civilization between a bonobo
is he
society and a
the
chimpanzee society.
is he the gay guy that started the project Solar? Is that him?
I have no idea if he's gay. Um, he looks like a gay porn star, so maybe so.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's like bald. He's like bald and
Yeah, bald with a beard. He's got like more abs than is humanly
yeah,
possible. Yeah.
yeah. So I heard about his like I forgot. It's like projects. It's like Solar, and I liked a lot about it. But that was one part that was just a little off to me. Is like he's so about masculinity. Like that's one of his like core things is what is a man, how to be a man, blah blah blah. But yeah, he's gay, and I'm like, I don't know. It's a little tough for me. Like that's a little tough sell for me. But
So, in his defense, historically speaking, prior to the Christian monopoly in the 1600s, homosexual relations across all major empires was
like
considered normal.
Spartans, yeah, Spartans and
Yeah,
samurai.
so
Yeah,
it
I
was
thought about
considered
that. Yeah,
normal with, well, no, it was normal with children under about 16. So the fact that he's doing it with grown men, that's more Greek era, which is an outlier. But I'm just saying it's not so unmasculine that we can't find any examples of masculine societies, if that makes any sense.
yeah, yeah. I thought about some of that kind of stuff like that. Like, and anyways, that's a whole aside. But I just came across that. But yeah, I mean, that's not to undermine any of the work he's done on primatology and all that kind of good stuff. But you make a good point. Yeah, authoritarianism is the default. Look into nature, top down hierarchy by violence. Honestly, is still that way in society in our across the world to a large extent. Luckily, we're able to
Well,
afford a level
we're
of
going
freedom
back
within
to
that.
default. They're just, our elites, and I use that word carefully. Let's just call them vested interest groups. They seem very adamant about wanting to go back to that because they don't feel safe.
Hmm.
And I understand that, but at the same time, I don't know if they understand the consequences of their actions when you cripple your country like that. When you talk about like a WEF style 50-minute city, I don't see how China doesn't take advantage of that
Right.
because you're going to stall all progress from that point forward. And you're going to pretty much intellectually castrate your entire population. Who's going to fight for you?
Yeah.
Like in my
Exactly.
head, I'm like thinking through this and I'm like, okay, what happens in 50 years when you're dead? These
Yeah.
elites are all in their 60s and 70s. What happens after you're dead?
Hmm.
And I'm like, the only thing that's going to happen is Mexico and all the Central American countries are going to come up here with AKs and they're going to butcher us, and we're not going to know what our gun is because everything is monitored, and we've never been outside of our pods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how does that doesn't work? Like, I don't understand the end goal here. And then, oh, by the way, they're going to take all of our missiles, all of our guns, all of our tanks that have been sitting here forever, and they're going to go and do it to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm like thinking, and I'm like, okay, this is a death cult, or you're stupid, and I don't think they're stupid.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a
that
good point.
I'll get
I
on.
do want to follow up on that at some point. Like kind of just continuing to talk about like the powers that be, what their plan is, what we think is going to happen. There's a lot of good stuff there. But yeah, we'll try to get through it for now. So I think that was pretty good. Just like yeah, the importance of freedom, the importance of the responsibility you've got to defend. You've got to attain. You've got to attain and defend that freedom. And also just the idea that it is a balance as well. Like too much freedom can be a bad thing. Most people are dumb and don't know what to do with it. And too much no freedom is obviously bad as well. So, very good. So, next one is huge. This is like really my number one. I shall protect and defend the seeking of truth. Um, That's huge. I mean, if you don't know what's what, if you don't have a model, if you have no concept of truth, then you have nothing. I mean, you have no way to navigate reality, no way to do anything if you're being lied to.
This
Huh?
is how deconstructionists
Yeah.
obtain monopoly on power through words and psychology. Whenever you go on, occasionally, when you go a comment on someone's post, you'll get one of the transgender crowds, or they're almost entirely women, minorities, and probably some kind of LGBT spectrum, almost entirely. And they tend to be a very aggressive. And actually, a couple days ago, I think I was having this conversation with one of these women, and I was like pointing things out to her, and she kept trying to flip it. And then she would be like, "Where's the source?" And I'm like, "I'm not going to give you a source because this no matter what source I use, it's not going to be the source you're looking for
Right.
because it's not an approved based on your frame."
Right.
Because she doesn't operate on a model of truth; she operates on a model of emotion. It's
Consensus and
you,
social and
yeah,
emotion. Yeah, exactly.
because it and that's that emotion is the enemy of truth if you really think about it, because
Right.
preference falsification is 100% emotion based. It's
Yeah.
I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, I don't want to look
Yeah.
weird,
Truth
I
versus
don't
face. Yep.
feel.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's dangerous.
Yes.
It's dangerous because you're going to end up like with China, where when everyone ignores the truth to save face, you get a totalitarian dictator that doesn't know what the hell is going on, and
Yeah.
everyone's scared to tell him anything because if they do, they'll kill him or
And
he'll kill
this
them.
is the
So
funny
it's
thing too. Like a lot of things that come up, a lot of principles and discussion. There's like kind of this like, oh, there's a spectrum and there's a balance, but truth is really not, hardly in one of those because they're like, for example, the truth versus face or truth versus fitting in or whatever it is. It's like there's really no problem with just like what's the worst case that happens? Like just brutal. Well, okay, I was gonna say like brutal truth. I mean, sometimes if you told the population like brutal truth, they might not be able to handle it. They might go crazy and burn everything down. So maybe there is such a
Well,
thing
it's not
as
even that. Like they bought into a beautiful lie and they've memorized the words to defend it. It's kind
yeah,
of like debating with Christians. They defend the Bible with the Bible. Well, the Wokastanis defend woke with woke work and literature. So
yeah,
it's a religion. And so, like, no, you can't, because they don't operate on truth. They operate on what, they talk about the patriarchy and what do they call like gender norms? They call them like they're like forced upon us like by brainwashing or something, and then if we just leave it alone, it all goes.
yeah.
And it's like you're that's not if you don't have a way to systematically understand reality, then nothing has any meaning. Words don't mean anything. You can't trust
It just
anyone
crumbles.
because you have
Yeah,
no way to communicate with them.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like, how do you go through your day?
yeah.
And the only
Western
reason
civil.
this works, the
Good.
only reason this works is because all of them live in either, the center city, Atlanta, LA, or San Francisco, New York City, or most of the very, very West Coast and the very, very East Coast
Right.
on the North is Puritan genetics. Puritans are fucking crazy people. They were always crazy people. Europe didn't want them. They chased them out, and
Yeah.
they came over here. And then when Christianity fell, they were still crazy, but they adopted a different kind of crazy. And
Yeah.
so now they're woke and Puritan
Yeah.
Christians.
Exactly.
Um, and
Yeah.
so they've always been crazy. The funny thing is they have the prettiest white girls, which is very amusing to me. But I don't know how the hell they. But
That's
and of
funny.
course the Ashkenazis are make up like 20% of them anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, they
So
are just.
yeah, we get this kind of this main and this again. This is why this is so key to what we identify with and who our enemies are. Is just truth versus lies, consensus, manipulation, emotion, all these
As
other
I like
problems.
to say way too often, my enemy is a notion, not a nation.
Yeah.
So that's super important that I like to drive down, because when you get into certain conversations, you can appear as if you're what they call racist or a
Right.
sexist, or everyone
Right.
calls her a classist.
Right.
It's you're not targeting a diagnosable group. It's what's in your head.
An
That's
idea.
what I care about.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. Um, one question I want to ask is like, can you think of something that's more valuable than truth? Can you think of something that you would say is higher principle, more important concept, than truth? Because to me, it's the highest.
So truth in itself is, I don't it's the only reference that I can come up with is it's like the carbon of our periodic table,
Yeah,
metaphorically
it's like the
speaking.
backbone, the
It,
center
it,
point. Yeah,
it it's
the
literally
building block.
everything
Yes.
that is alive. anything that's dead, because the majority of this world, anything that's alive is carbon, right?
Right.
And without it, though, everything literally disintegrates into like it's non-alive, like
Just yeah,
metallic
entropy. Yeah.
dust.
Well, see,
And
and
so,
yeah.
yeah, I
Um,
would say I don't know. I'm sure that there's some metaphysical, cherry picking we can probably select to place it on top, but we're gonna have to say, well, it's this in retrospect to this on top of truth. But in isolation, individual constructs, truth is probably that simple.
I did think of something too, because a lot of times we think about like truth versus lies, and obviously like lies are bad. But one thing I thought about is the idea of like falsehoods or the imagination or fiction, where it's like it seems to be like totally okay and a good thing. It is it's not.
It's called invented truth. Those are not always bad
Yeah,
if the society is not capable of articulating truth.
right.
Like one a huge issue we're going through right now is, well, let me just an example that I like to use for truth is evolution is not definitive, nor does it solve all of our problems regarding the question where do we come from.
Hmm.
But we use it anyway because it's the best model for
Exactly.
understanding how the world works. And
Right.
I mean, if you had to like put it in my head and have me, say what do you believe in, I would say that both evolution and creationism, I don't think have a sufficient amount of evidence for me to say I 100% agree with them.
Interesting.
Um, I don't know. Is usually what I say when like where do we come from?
Yeah.
Because neither of those make sense. The more I look at it and replicate it in my head and look at the evidence that I have seen that's not slandered or whatever.
Hell yeah.
And that's like that's a truth question too.
So that's something I actually want to take out a note too, because obviously, as you may know, like evolution is it's such a core part of my framework. I'd like to revisit that and like really try to hammer where you think the biggest gaps are in evolution. That would be a really good one to go into. Um,
Biggest gap is after you get to multi-cell organisms. If you just want to put a footnote for next time.
After you get to multi-cell organism, okay, yeah, sounds good. Y'all
Yeah,
definitely dive into that.
you can't have a multi-cell organism within formulate into the variations that we do
Hmm.
currently have in the amount of time they say that the Earth has been alive. It would
Okay,
take about 100,000 times longer than that.
okay, hell yeah, yeah. It definitely takes a lot of like biological knowledge and so forth that I don't even have that much of. So yeah, that sounds good. Um, cool. So truth, very big, very important, probably core. Everything emanates from that. Everything pretty much is within its scope. So that's a very good one. And we have to protect and defend it as well. Once again, responsibility. It doesn't just come like we've got to stand by it. Um, so number 4, I shall honor the covenants and promises I make with my fellow man.
Don't lie.
Don't lie.
And
Uphold your
actually,
word.
better yet, the reason that I have this, I phrased it like that, is because I tried to solve for the white lie phenomena, which is sometimes you have to lie
Hmm.
because it actually ends up being less terrible of an outcome than telling the truth. This is in retrospect specifically when you're working with enemies. If I tell the truth to my enemy, there's a high likelihood that I could die or those around me could die, right? And so when I was writing this all encompassing, I'm like, okay, there has to be a specific way that I can write this that factors that in. Which is why I wrote like 5 paragraphs on this is how you don't lie,
Yeah.
and this is how you don't, I guess. But yeah,
Well, one thing that occurs to me about this, and more so than lying, because we just talked about like truth versus lying, but what really occurs to me about this one is the idea of trust, is the idea of your
yeah,
word and working to
thing.
uphold
So
your word.
this number 4 protects number 3. So in order to have trust, I have to keep my promises.
Yeah, yeah,
So that was
exactly.
more of like,
It's the building
yeah,
blocks
and
of the
so
of trust. Yeah.
yeah, and then it's more because when I tell you I'm going to do something and I don't do it,
Hmm.
that erodes trust. And then over time, your trust erodes more and more and more as you get older. But if you can have a foundation of no matter what, so long as me telling you this does not result in the destruction of you, if it's destruction of myself and I caused it, then I deserve it. But the destruction of you that does not deserve it, or the destruction of others, then the lie should be permitted. Otherwise, do not. If, rather than saying, "Oh, I'll call you later," or "Oh, I'm gonna come hang out with you on Saturday," just say,
Yeah.
"No, I'm not." Like
Or
that
just
little
be
thing right
honest up
there.
front. They're like, I may or
Yeah,
may not be able to. Yeah.
Right, that little nuance makes all the difference when you compound it over thousands of instances across a human life. And
Right.
that human life is probably going to encounter other humans that he's going to also reflect those instances upon. And that's going to spread the weight of, you know, not keeping covenants and promises and things like that.
Right. Another one, another word that I came across, I feel like when I was reading this one was integrity. Just like the, that's what builds your character and your integrity is kind of these small experiences about like being, honest up front about what your commitments are, about whether you can make it or not. And if you do give a commitment, trying your absolute best or having a very good explanation and a reason or making it up to them, like, you know, just having respect for yourself and others to like uphold, it's pretty basic. Yeah. But
Yep.
yet so many people fall short. All right, very good. Let's see. So last number 5, I shall remember that I will die and respect those who have already.
Right. So we can talk all day about how we should conduct ourselves when we live, but in our modern society, more than ever, we have no idea how to handle death.
Right, agree. Very much agree.
And that, I'm one of the few Gen Zs that I know that have been to more than 5 funerals.
Hmm.
Most of my friends have never been to a funeral. They've never seen a dead body.
Yeah,
I've seen way more than that.
yeah,
So I've been to third world countries more than twice. You know, you only have to go once for a week to see some weird shit.
right.
Um, so it was extremely important, at least for me, to write down how they should process it and not tell them how, but kind of like explain how
Right.
it would go, if that makes sense. And then like how you should think about it without like, I guess.
Yeah, and this is obviously very core for like any system like Christianity, for example, or any religion tries to have answers about, where do you go after you die, or where did you come from, and and also your ancestors, where did they go? It's very much about that. And what's interesting is that even though that system kind of exists, like you said, so many people still don't seem to really be comfortable with, and it's always going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But people seem to be still pretty neurotic about death, despite having
Yeah, they don't
answers.
know how to process it. They don't know, and also like when I also have in there, I'm literally looking at the typo that's bothering me. Um, so they don't know how to like. One of the biggest things is the estate, right? You have siblings, parents arguing over money or something for an estate. If it's not in writing from that individual, it's not yours. And I wrote that up because it solves the problem of what to do with this person for 0 to 5 years after he dies, and then maybe 300 when you're digging up his dead bones, taking his watch or something that he has on him.
Right.
It's not yours. You should respect him because that was you. That will be you, and you should understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like it's I mean there's so many angles to take, but there's a lot of core truths out of that. Like just like it's part of nature, it's part of the cycle of life. Like and a lot of it has to do with your ego and your concept of self and mortality. And that's so big too. Like if you can grasp death, then you can grasp like you can conceptualize what it's like beyond. Like that really is one of the best meditations you can do with regarding your ego and the limitations of your being, and try to get beyond that, and understand that the world doesn't revolve around you, that there and it helps you build empathy, helps you build a larger perspective. And then also to the ancestor part too, just understanding it's a huge thing to connect with your ancestors, and kind of just have respect for those who have come before you and who have made sacrifices and gone through struggles to get you where you are. And a lot of this is a little bit more supernatural, but to believe that there's probably some kind of connection out there still, whether they're watching over you or whatever it is. I think it's a very poetic kind of expression, and there's a lot of
Well, technically they are because the actions of your ancestors 7 generations reflect upon your current life.
yeah, it's in your genes, it's in your psyche.
So,
Yeah,
not only is it inside of you, their actions are what's affecting you right now.
absolutely. I love it. I think Alex Jones had some kind of quote that was just kind of like him. He get all hyped up, and he was like, "You are the coalescing of like your ancestors, like they're living through you." And it's just like one of those hype moments. He would make a good like you hear some like preachers in churches who were kind of like get all energetic and stuff. Like Alex Jones is that way for me. He gets all riled up.
Raised by
So let's read this. I like this little end note here. So I'm going to read it. We move forward in the darkness so that mankind may move forward in the light. We remember that nothing is absolute, yet everything is permitted. And In irony, we acknowledge, for we agree to sin and experience the punishment, pain, and death for our actions, so that the greater of mankind can live in peace and truth. Malevolence and wickedness shall never cease, neither shall we cease to keep fighting for men and women to seek truth freely and continue in their eternal quest to build a paradise away from all that is wicked in the world. I don't know how to pronounce this, but Vive Memoire Letty? Is that someone's name? Or is that a Latin? You're muted.
It's Latin.
What does it mean?
To be honest, I don't remember.
It's okay. It sounds cool.
I'm going to Google it actually because I honestly don't remember.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Here we go.
I have about 50 phrases that I used to use in high school because I learned Latin and I used to use a bunch of phrases and I completely forgot.
It's long live the memory of fate. I like that.
Right.
Hell yeah.
Nietzsche. That was for Nietzsche. I remember.
Yes. Yeah, you talk about that. Very good. Yeah, Nietzsche is definitely very big. And then we have a kind of a almost like a sigil or a piece of art, kind of symbolic. I believe you made. Looks very cool. Hell yeah.
I saw it in an ocean in a dream when I was like 16.
Fuck yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I love dreams. Cool. Yeah, so that was a good overview. Obviously, like, this is again very much of what I'm into, and like the direction of the natural order, the idea of trying to kind of bring together a constitution, a set of principles, a kind of an identity, kind of values to kind of rally around. And this pretty much hits on those same points. I was going to throw in there, like you may remember, some of my first responses, and one of the things I think about is trying to map it onto how I see things. And it was very similar. It's like obviously like truth very much at the top for me. Nature is pretty much like the actual embodiment of truth. It's like what an expression of the simulation of the reality that we're in. And then for me, everything else kind of goes from there. Like when you look at nature, like we talked about monkeys, we talk about the way that animals exist and the way these things came to be. Like this is the blueprint. This is the framework through which everything else has come to be. We go through them with that frame. Like for example, number one, like under what it means to undermine and subvert. Well, that's basically like you said, you could be taking it out of fence as letting monsters in. Those institutions evolve for a reason, so we should respect that. That's an emanation of nature, right? And then like the idea of freedom. Like freedom gives us the ability to have a healthy level of mutation, so that we can have good economy, so that we can have ingenuity, so that we can just have a good place to live. And that's something that we evolved, because look at what happened to other societies who did not have a level of freedom. They didn't, like you said, they just decayed because they had no reason to go on. And then so obviously we said truth, and then so the idea of, again, trust, integrity, your word, honor, promises, all parts of the social contract and the science of cooperation. If people didn't work together, if you couldn't trust your fellow man, then you're never going to win a war. You're never going to be able to build a society. You're never going to be able to build a fucking bridge. So that's a huge part of what it means to cooperate in society. And then lastly, just reconciling with death and your ancestry. Again, that's probably one of the biggest reflections of nature. That is the cycle of nature. It's such a necessity. And of course, evolution is probably a big thing too. So that'll be a good one for next time, like I said. But that's kind of how I've reconciled some of these things together. And it'll be good to work on and continuing to formulate that.
Yeah, definitely.
Hell yeah. I love it. And this is the greatest thing too. You said something earlier about being able to kind of, draw from different sources and kind of formulate a cohesive kind of narrative or worldview out of it. And that's what I think is so... Narrative what?
I call it narrative assimilation. I have not found any patents with the exception of in college level literature.
Yeah.
So I might be the first to use that term.
I like that. I'm down to use that. I've been using like things like, I say like alignment, like we're trying to align our worldviews or just whatever it kind of is. What do they say in
assimilation, because we have a written narrative by an individual, and then we're pulling another narrative and we're assimilating them as we would
how do they fit together. Yeah, and I think like Kurt says that like a universally commensurable value neutral language is kind of like a similar kind of thing. Like whenever you're really pursuing truth and getting into it and building like a really, and like we talked about too, our political cultural frames, just like all of our frames in general, are totally in flux right now in society. And what we really need is someone's a group to come together and about, look, here it is. We're building a piece together. Here's a core frame. It's not perfect, but like you said about evolution, it's stronger than anything else we have. Um, and
I would
once we
much rather 100,000 people with a 99 bad ideas and one good idea get those ideas out, and then over time we combine those one good ideas into a framework that works for us.
That's exactly,
So
that's exactly how evolution works. It's 99% shitty mutations that don't help or hurt you, but just so that you can have a small chance that you will get a 1%. But once you discover that 1%, once you discover that one advantage, that's going to get propagated exponentially into the population and into the idea pool, like you said, notions, not nations. So yeah, and that's again, that's the reason I brought it up is because, like here we are, two different people that have taken two different paths, but like we've followed truth and we've pursued nature and objectivity, and it's brought us to a very similar place, and that's just the most beautiful thing. Like we are able to find that, and the same goes for a lot of the guys we interact with, and for what we're building. It's just people saying, oh yeah, I see that. Unlike a lot of these things that are out there right now, like leftism or wokeism or Christianity and stuff, it kind of takes a lot of like jumping through hoops or emotions or consensus to really.
They're psychological band-aids to a greater issue.
Exactly. Exactly. And we meanwhile come out with this, we're not coming out with the band-aids, we're coming out with the swords and just like fucking chop it in half and like expose it for what it is, get into the root, get into the heart of it. And then also once we've torn down the corruption, and then we can, then we can plant the seeds, and then we can rebuild from there. So it's quite an undertaking, but if there's anyone that can do it, it's people like us. It's just like, young, competent, intelligent, truth-seeking people. So
Yep, I agree.
hell yeah, man. Well, that'd be about an hour. Good place to leave off. Good session. Maybe for next time we'll do evolution or just whatever's on our mind. But this has been really good for sure.
All right, sounds good, man.
Hell yeah. Cool. Alrighty. Thanks for your time, man. We'll talk to you later. See ya.